Rob,
Hey, Cynthia.
do you have a few minutes to talk about something?
With you, I can always spend some time.
Okay. So I was just wrapping up a security and permissions project, and I also did a class a couple of weeks ago. And I remember hearing in one of our meetings that you'd also just wrapped up a security and permissions project with a client. But I also remember that you and I had, I guess you could call it a somewhat heated conversation about what way to go about getting the permissions properly assigned to a person when I mentioned the recorder, and you kind of like made a funny face or turned up your nose or something. Can you remind me of what approach you were taking and why you felt that was the right approach and not the recorder?
Well, I didn't have the writer idea back then, and I will tell you that. So having spent, like 20 years working in NAV, BC, and Navision, I know the roles that people have, and Microsoft has done a good job of setting up the basic roles for everybody. So I was going to take that approach. I did that approach and was very successful back in the day. I would create one or two custom pages and reports as a role or permission set. And that way I could block out what the people were not going to be able to see, but I was going to use their roles. So if I was the AP processor, I was going to take the standard AP processing role or permission set and then assign that to the person and give them whatever other permission sets they needed based on their specific roles.
But Rob, so I kind of took that approach too, but the problem I always had was how do you get them to have what they are not supposed to have? Because I always felt like those permission sets that we got from Microsoft were too broad.
And I agree. I think that the permission set itself was very broad. So I always used to modify, I would take a copy of the permission set that was out there, and I would modify it to remove the fields or the tables that not the fields, but the pages or the reports or even the tables that I didn't want them to have access to. Like, for instance, I'll give you an example. If I was a purchase order receiver, if I was receiving, I didn't want them to also have the ability to do the invoice. So I always would go in there and tweak that specific permission set.
How long did that take?
Well, it did take a while, but in fact, and that's okay. So now, hindsight being what it is, and now that we've got such a great recorder in BC, I will tell you that I had gone about that process and it had taken me a couple of days to get the permission sets the way I wanted them for this particular.
Now, is this in your recent project that you were working on?
It was in my recent project. But then we had a major problem with the upgrade process and we had to start over again. And now I had lost like 2 weeks of work, not just the time that I spent on the permission sets, but I was now 2 weeks behind where I needed to be. And I'm like, okay, wait a minute. Cynthia said this recorder is pretty good. Well, we'll go find out. And damn it, you were right.
Tell my husband that. Tell my husband that.
So, I also want to share that, we had set up, and again, before go live, people don't practice as much as they should. So you only know the permissions that they need based on what they're doing when you're sitting with them and doing the recording. Well, the president of that company decided he was going to have a come to Jesus meeting with everybody. We had a Teams meeting with 35 people on it. And everybody, and he was on it too, and he made everybody, while I was on there, go through the process of their procedures. And you know what? We were on for 2.5 hours, and I probably recorded another 20 custom permission sets for people. So that was a real lifesaver, because on go live day, Kim was out there and she saw that we had, except for a few minor permission issues, it was a very smooth cutover. So
yeah, yes, so it was interesting because I was thinking about that, because in the project that I'm working on right now, we have a CRM integration, and that CRM integration is only in the production environment. So we had to figure out ways to use the recorder for that. But I kept thinking, man, if it was back in the old days where I had to be looking or creating custom permission sets, I wouldn't even know where to begin on the CRM stuff. And it's also, it's kind of like a moving target. But okay, well, so in other words, you've kind of become a convert and realized that using the out-of-the-box permission sets versus the recorder, which way's better, huh?
I 100% agree with you. You were the writer version.
The righter way. So, hey, another question I have for you. Did you find that when you were doing the recordings and you got the users involved, because now they're more involved in that process, did you find that when they ran into problems that they were a little more understanding because they understood the process a little bit better?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, I had one individual who had a very custom permission set or group of permission sets say to me afterwards, wow, and you did this for all our people? So she did recognize, and she was fairly high up in the organization to recognize that, yes, this is a very specific group of permissions people are getting, so, and very limited. And she was very happy that we were giving people or not giving people access to critical information that they didn't need. So,
Yeah.
yes.
No, I think that that's a good, very good point, especially when you can get someone higher up like that, realizing the effort. And I think the other thing is too that I I think that when the users are involved in that recording process or understand what's going on, we're also leaving behind the legacy that we try to do at New View Strategies, which is we're trying to arm you with the information and the training to continue to support your system on your own, right? To not be dependent on developers or partners or even New View Strategies. So I think that recorder is something that users can use, whereas that 20 years plus knowledge that you and I are talking about isn't something we can translate to them, right? Just reading those permission sets and knowing what should be done, but we can show somebody how to use recorder.
Well, that's true because during that 2.5 hour session, not only was the president on, but the IT administrator was there, and he got to see what I was doing. So he was much more comfortable, and he is now taking over. In fact, I was very happy the other day. He added some new functionality that kind of they updated their license, which meant there were some more permissions that needed to be extended. And I was unavailable, and he was able to get rid of take care of the problem. So.
Yeah, perfect. That's the way it should be, I think. But one thing you mentioned earlier about the permission sets, when we moved to BC, and actually it was right before BC, I think in 18 we started seeing them, they started adding those permission sets that were D365 in front of them.
Yes.
And last time I counted, which was last year, there were 74 of them. And that's a lot of permission sets. And I agree with you. You look at that and you say, oh, here's one for accounts payable. Here's one for accounts receivable. These should be good. This should be something that I could add. But it's interesting because the accounts payable permission set that's in there assumes that you might also be doing drop shipments. So thereby, whoever's doing AP may need to see sales orders. Well, guess what? In a lot of organizations that I work with, they don't do drop shipments, and there's no reason for the person in AP to see the sales orders. So already that D365 AP set is too broad. Or to
Yes.
see the GL entries. That's another thing. So I am so glad that you are converted to the recorder. And did you get a chance also to see some of the views that we now have where we can see which permission sets are assigned to which groups and using effective permissions? Did you get the opportunity to use any of those?
I did get to see some of that. And, the other thing that I did like was that because there was the fear I had about using the recorder was I wouldn't necessarily know what tables or reports they had.
Yeah, I
And once
remember
it's
you saying
recorded,
that.
once it's recorded, you can see everything that you've added. And that was the other thing that I would share with the users then so that they could see, hey, we just added this. This is why you now have that permission. And they were again, the more informed the user is, the better they feel about the way they're using the system. So
Right. And I guess the other thing about the recorder, if you think about it, you're working, and let's say you're recording permission set for the payment journal. And so the person who's doing the recording, they're going to go and they're going to use suggest vendor payments. If you weren't using the recorder, whoever is determining what to build in that permission set, they might go look for a code unit called suggest vendor payments, not
yes.
realizing it's a report. So I think that's the other benefit to this, because if you don't understand the architecture of the system, you might be looking in the wrong list or the wrong place to build your own permission sets. And I think if you just do one recording, even a short one, and look at what it records and how it records it, and then think that you could possibly do that. No. So, hey, Rob, the other thing I heard, and I heard this from someone else in one of my classes, they were taking the approach that they gave everyone access to all table data, and they were limiting their access by assigning only certain pages, which is exact opposite of the Microsoft philosophy with the permission sets that are provided by Microsoft, which is to limit table data, but give all page access. So again, the recordings eliminate that whole discussion because you're only recording the permissions that you have access to. Now, one thing I want to mention to you, and you might not have encountered this yet, but one of the things that I learned was even with the recordings, you might give somebody in a recording read access to GL entries that you don't want to give them. So what we found was we were using recordings for everything, except we created 2 permission sets in one group to allow someone read access, or I think it was insert access with a 0 page, or I'm sorry, a 0 record number so people can post, and no access to view the GL entries. It's a really unique combination, and I think I'm going to be actually posting something out on our blog about it. But my point is this: you have to double check when you do these recordings that you don't run into conflicts that would give somebody access from a new recording that you don't want them to have. So for example, again, somebody's not allowed to see GL entries. They go to the chart of accounts. I don't want them to see balances. I don't want them to see GL entries when they go to find entries. We don't want them to see the GL. All of the recordings, we do all of our testing and they can't see the GL. We record a new permission set because, like you mentioned, somebody adds new functionality or someone gets new responsibilities. That permission set might actually give them read to GL entries. So you can go into that view, effective permissions, and go to the GL entries in the list and then go down and see the conflict. And we just changed it to indirect and it worked. So again, I don't want it to sound like it's all, coming up roses on the recorder, because I don't want you coming back and saying, Cynthia, you were wrong. You still have to double check it.
I agree. I want to say one more thing. You mentioned about how, you might be looking for a certain thing and try and make a simple permission set for somebody. Well, I had a situation where the AP person needed permission to run the sales tax collected report because they had some taxes that they had to pay based on some revenue that was generated for certain counties. And so we turned the recorder on just to record what she needed to run the sales tax collected report. I want to say there were like 50 permissions she needed. I was just shocked.
I know, and yeah, like we're going to figure that out ourselves. I don't care how many years of experience you have. And again, I think what's interesting though, you said it was 50, but we might try to figure it out and come up with 60. So we could inadvertently give somebody more permissions than they needed as we're trying to figure it out ourselves. The other thing so I'm going to make an argument against the recorder here. And I guess it's not against the recorder, it's just a caution. You've got to be really careful because what I've noticed is if you have things like maybe you have a custom extension, I guess that's a redundant term, but you have an extension installed and maybe your partner has it in development mode. So that's how the installation is. And I can't remember what, I think it's like the type of install. If you're going to do permission recordings in your UAT environment, you want to make sure that any of your customizations are either in PTE or actually installed, not in development mode, because we did find problems with the recorder with that. So there are some little caveats about, some problems that you'll get with the recorder, but they kind of make sense because it can only record what's real. And I guess if something's in development mode, it's not real. So we did run into some little issues like that. But again, we did probably about 5 hours of work of recording and testing, unit testing, and then we put the permissions into production for just a couple of users in the department to kind of work through issues there. And I think maybe we spent about an hour in total resolving those issues. And then we rolled it out to 2 more in another company within the organization, and they haven't had any issues. They thought they did. They said, "Oh, I can't get here." And I'm like, "Are you supposed to get there?" And it turned out they weren't. So I am so glad that you are a convert, and I will let you convert me to jobs and contact management in BC instead of
I will look forward to
CRM.
that. I will look forward to that.
We'll have to
Thank you
do
again.
we'll have to do a back and forth on that one, Rob, so that we can share our experiences with that. So
Well,
great.
see
Thanks
ya.
for sharing.
I appreciate it. Thank you. You have a good
Okay.
afternoon.
You too.
Bye
Bye.
bye.